All right, we are live. So this is just me today. Morten will not be joining us today. And today I'm going to be doing a lot of sculpting. So I'm going to be working on this guy here, and I'm going to be working a bit on his body. But before that, I'm just going to wait for people to show up. So we just shared this on our social media. So hopefully this here should be here pretty soon. Or people should show up soon. So, as a reminder, we have a somersault, like you can see down here. Nice little reminder. So, I'm just going to be working on the fawn. This is very much inspired by one of my favorite characters from Pan's Labyrinth, the fawn from that as well. And we are just going to be working that character up. So here is my reference. Remember always to have reference when you are working. So I always spend a lot of time just finding this. The reference I found so far is it's pretty hard to actually find good reference from the movies or from the movie. It's a bit of an old movie now, so it's almost 20 years old, and a lot of the stuff is quite low res. So a lot of the stuff I found is stuff from the production. So this is like, you know, with the when they were actually in the suit and such. So it's tricky to find good ref with this because it's this may or may not be what they used. It might be work in progress. Maybe they had multiple versions as well. There might be VFX on top, and yeah, it's just generally hard. So some of the ref I found that's really good is this. I think this is from a miniature. Well, not a miniature, another one, a fan sculpt or something from a convention. Not entirely sure, but that is what we have. So if people in the chat can just confirm that you can hear me fine and everything there is working, that would be great. So just double checking here. Yeah, it should be working. All right. Perfect. Yeah. So people can hear me fine. All good, all good. So what we'll do today is, like I said, we'll talk about the sculpting of this guy, but also I'll take questions as well. So whatever questions you guys have, feel free to just spam me with that. So that's I may or may not get to it right away, but that's the approach to today. So I'm going to talk a bit about my general sculpting workflow. We just did a short recently as well when I'm using this asset where I'm using a technique that's very similar to what I did there. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm constantly working on top of the model, trying to make nice appealing shapes. At this point I'm gonna go a little bit away from the reference. I think I'm just gonna do a one-to-one. I want to feel like the final thing. I want to feel more like this for the final thing, but I don't think I'm gonna do a perfect one-to-one. Honestly, it's just too much of a pain to try to make it go perfectly one-to-one. It just turns into a digital job at that point instead of just something that's more creative. So I'm going to generally make more of my own version of this character, which I think is a lot more fun. So this is where we are so far. I think about 5 hours in or so, maybe a bit more than that. It includes the body. The body is really rough at this point, so this is something I'm gonna have to work up a fair bit. I'm probably gonna be working up the body, like with the body more this week in the streams, because I'll be doing a lot of streaming during Black Friday summer sale week that we have currently, and I'm probably going to do a retopology job on him as well. So I'm just trying to basically match the reference. One thing I'm always thinking about when it comes to sculpting, this is something that all the mentees I've ever had for mentorship have experienced, that I'm always trying to separate it out into anatomy and then design, essentially trying to be sure that the anatomy is sound, that the anatomy is solid and makes sense, and at the same time that the design is also interesting. This is an incredibly hard balance to find. It's really tricky to find that balance. And it's about 1,000 degrees in London today, so I just had to increase my fan a little bit because apparently the UK doesn't have any AC, so I'm boiling a little bit, but that is what it is. So I'm just trying to block out the body as well. What I'm doing with this is, as you can see, the head is a whole separate mesh than the body. The reason for that is really so it's a lot easier to iterate on it. So it's a lot easier to, really just from a technical point of view, it's a lot easier to connect to this way so that I can keep the body nice and loose, and I can keep the head nice and refined. I will of course have to merge these two at some point, but that's how I'm doing it for now. It's really nice and handy. So I'm just trying to work this up. So I had I had hair on top. The hair is of course going to have to be replaced with something more sensible, because this stuff here does not look fantastic, right? Like, this is more to test the design. I think it's so important to really refine the design, get this right early on, and then you can worry about like how exactly everything connects up. But you need just to make sure that you have a first pass of a design quite early on. This is going to form a lot of stuff. It's going to form how you are, like what areas you even needs work. So there are just so many things that just relies entirely on the design. One thing I'm trying to figure out now, this is honestly quite a tricky one, is trying to find his overall balance gesture, because my god, this is a wacky looking character. It's one of those, like, I'm kind of tempted to go something more towards this for like more of an appeal thing. I don't think I'm going for just one of the main shapes they have in the film, because he's just a little bit wacky looking, and some of this could be because it's a guy in a suit, so he's gonna have to kind of somehow work based on those limitations. But yeah, I'm just trying to find the balance of him at the moment, and it doesn't help that he's supposed to be a bit awkward in terms of balance. Like, one of the character traits is that he does actually move in a really precarious manner. So it's really hard to get that stuff right. But the way I'm doing this, honestly, is I'm just kind of winging it. I'm doing a little bit of the balance and doing a little bit of the anatomy. So yeah, just working a little bit all over the character. So, but yeah, just trying to find ref is so important for the approach. If you're trying to do this kind of stuff without ref, like, it's never going to work. You might have heard me say that a fair few times in the tutorials and all that, but it's really true. Without ref, you really don't have anything. It's like trying to build a house without the schematics, right? Like, it's just not going to work. Polly is asking me, do you have any experience with 3D printing? Nope, not really. Looks really fun, but I don't really have any experience with that. One of the tricky things with this character is that he is asymmetrical, which is really annoying because, well, it means both sides are going to have to be done independently of each other. And the way I'm solving this is I'm ignoring the asymmetry. What you can do with this, kind of a clever way, is to have a bit of a base that's symmetrical, and then we can do a bit of a layer on top of it that maybe stuff like this whole thing here is fundamentally symmetrical, and then like a layer like this might be added on top, which, you know, it's not going to take that much time compared to the whole thing. This just means it's a lot easier to break it up. So for instance here we might have a bit of a overall shape form, and then this stuff here goes on top. So that's one way to break it up. Like, essentially trying to be smart about it. I'm also trying to take the whole character up at the same time to a certain level, so nothing is just going to be left in to like a 5% mark. I'm trying to take everything up to a certain level. Even though this is a bit of a wacky looking character, I do tend to I am going to try to follow human anatomy. So here we have the ribcage, which is what you can see here. He still has abs, because what fawn wouldn't have abs? So tons of stuff like this I'm just trying to get in. And for this I'm using a custom brush I've made. We might share this at some point with the community, but as of now we haven't. The reason I haven't is because I might turn this into a full brush pack, just so we can really like make some nice ones. I've full on replaced my my old hotkey, which was, I used a 3 key for that, for the clay buildup. I don't really use clay buildup anymore. I only use my custom one. Super handy. So just trying to get the anatomy up, trying to get the design up. What's your favorite muscle group to sculpt and you feel makes a huge difference when you finally get a blocked and refined? Oh, that's a really tricky one. It isn't really a favorite muscle group per se, because it's all connected. That's one of the things that is really tricky about anatomy. Like for instance here, I'll just start to explain some of this. So we have the pecs, right, going like this, basically like so. Then underneath we have the the biceps, then we're going to have the brachialis muscle, and we have the tricep, and everything is just kind of connected on top of this. We have the delt. Everything flows together. So it's a much bigger question for me, instead of it being a single case of, I should bring in an anatomy model for this. Instead of it being a single case of what's my favorite muscle to sculpt, I really just have my favorite thing is really making sure the puzzle fits together. So one of the things that's really, really handy, this is not really something a lot of people talk about, but that is really like the gesture of everything. So this is my favorite thing about it. Like, notice here, we have the deltoid here, and then it's almost like the deltoid line continues in here into the brachialis, like so, and this continues basically here into the bicep, and this whole thing continues here into the ridge muscles. And then we have a bit of a flow going in here, so everything flows really beautiful together. So this is really one of the puzzle pieces, is essentially you're dealing with just things flowing beautiful into each other. This is of course a bit of a stylized model, since it's an anatomy model and not a real human, but this is generally how it works. Like, if you get the anatomy right, everything kind of just flows. In terms of like muscles that are really important to get in, of course you're dealing with the big ones. Like, you know, if you don't get in the lats, like so, then latissimus dorsi, then you're in trouble. So you just have to get this kind of stuff in, right? You just have to get in the big muscle groups like this. This is something that's kind of handy as well. This is more of an anatomical tip. You see the forearm? Forearm is absolutely crazy. There are just way too many muscles. And the way I like to think about this, instead of it being just a huge mess, is as 3 separate shapes. One is the ridge muscles that goes like so. Another one is the extensors that go from up here, goes into like this, goes into the hand. And then from the other side, we have the flexors that do the opposite. Once you can simplify it into these 3 shapes, honestly, you kind of solved the anatomy. I think this is such a key thing. Same thing here. Notice how it's interlocked. Here we have the serratus anterior, and it's essentially just a series of triangles, right? Like here it looks like it's just like this, but it's really just a series of like triangles latching on from the scapula. And it goes here, goes like so, and then the obliques, the external obliques, beautifully connected. So it's almost like it's a handshake between these different shapes. So yeah, it's really interesting once you start to look at anatomy as something that is always interconnected. You've replaced the clay buildup, Polly says. Yep. it's still clay buildup. It's just a different alpha. I call it clay buildup HS for Henningsen. So I think I really do want to release this one, because you can see the quality of the brush is really nice. Like if you just sculpt some stuff here, it just gives you a really lovely texture. So this took quite some time to develop, but it's a very simple one. It's really just clay buildup with a custom alpha that I just painted. It's one of those. It's a very simple alpha, but it takes a long time to find something that's simple enough. Also, apologies if I've missed your questions. I'm not looking at chat all the time. Oh, hey, Mandarin is here. He says hello, and Adam says hello as well. Yeah, hey guys. Henning, concerning Modo, will you go back to it, or after leaving Modo and not having it sitting in your pipeline for years, would you say you would leave it? Or I'm not sure the exact what question here. Maybe it's just my heat stroke, but basically I'm not going back into Modo. I'm not. Modo is not for me. It's not a relevant software. It's it hasn't really been relevant for like about 10 years after the Foundry acquisition. It's not really an interesting software. So yeah, for me, Blender has the same hype as Modo had back then. So that's kind of where it's going. Maya, I'm still using Maya a lot as well. So yeah, Modo for me is not a relevant software. Which is a shame, because I was properly invested into that. It's such a good software. Like when I was using it, that was about 14 years ago or something, 15 years ago I started with it properly. It was just miles ahead of all other software, like in terms of modeling. Like it was straight up innovative when it came to that. but it really hasn't been updated in a very long time in terms of like it's still in development, just not really, just not compared to like what you're seeing with Blender or some other software, like Houdini. That's like every year is getting cool new stuff added to it. You should stream more frequently. Yeah, I would love that. That would be good fun. Peach is saying, hey, hey. Hey, hey, Peach. Oh, here's someone. I have a question regarding game industry at this point. What, with job laying off and AI, what can you guys express to artists? And it's rough out there. It's not just games. It's a lot of different industries that are struggling with this at the moment. It is just rough. Like there isn't really like a oh, it'll just be fine. Just be positive. Like it is just rough. Like it's not just games. Like there are layoffs in so many different industries now. We have a whole podcast video dedicated to this, but I mean, really, like it's my sympathies. Like that's really like more what I can say. I would say though that when the financial crisis hit, like 2008, 09, there were a lot of layoffs then as well, and you know it came back. Usually the market goes in cycles, and unless we have fundamentally broken thousands of years of the market dynamics, then it will come back. It might just take some time. I think it's always a good idea to use times like this to like upskill, like genuinely just try to, like I'm not going to say just like, it's fine, just make personal pieces. But if you have the mental bandwidth to do so and you have time to do so, I think that's a good idea. But I also recognize that's also difficult. Like it's not just like we saw this with COVID, right? Where suddenly everyone had so much spare time, at least a lot of people have more spare time. It wasn't just a time question for making personal projects or learning new things. It's also like a mental thing. If you're not mentally in a good space, it's very difficult to do that. But if you are in a situation where that is possible, I really, really do recommend at least spending some hours a day just learning something new, because it means that when when stuff is starting to hire again, that you're not just up to date on your skills where you were when you left, that you're actually better. It's just going to be much easier for you to get a job, because currently there are just a lot of people who are applying for the same jobs. So whenever there is an application, I reckon that they get hundreds, if not thousands, of applicants for it, because there are just so many. But what I'm hoping is that we see a bit of a boom again once people are starting to hire again, that there's going to be a lot of jobs available. But it's impossible to say, right? Like literally nobody knows what's going to happen with us. If somebody tells you they know, they're just full of crap, because it's genuinely impossible to predict what's going to happen from here. We've never seen what we're seeing now. Like one of the things that really like threw a wrecking ball at this whole thing was COVID, because the amount of money that was printed is unprecedented. Like so we're generally in uncharted territories here when it comes to what's going to happen. Also, like the whole thing, add AI to this as well. Yeah, it's generally not easy to say what's going to happen. But like truly, like my sympathies are with people who are applying for jobs or graduated in the last year or so, or who obviously got let go as well. Absolutely heartbreaking to see that. Hi from Argentina. Well, hi from the UK. Nice to see you here. It's really fun to have people from across the globe just coming in to say hi. So I'm just trying to work up the character, really just trying to work over the whole character now. Like I'm deviating a bit from this, particularly this reference here, which I don't think is particularly decent for the head, but just trying to make it a bit more interesting. One thing that is very annoying with finding references today is like AI has legit destroyed Google or Pinterest at this point. It's like to the point you basically have to insert a tag like before 2021 or 2022, and it like even for the Pan's Labyrinth here, I found AI art, and it was really, really annoying. I deleted it from my reference board now, but it was really annoying because I didn't actually catch that it was AI until after a while, because a lot of these are kind of crappy. Like this is a drawing, right? I believe it's a drawing of it, but it's still kind of okay. And so this is a ZBrush grab from somebody else, and this is just a photo. So a lot of these are just kind of crappy. So I didn't actually catch that the ref I was using was AI until I've been lining it up for a bit, and I realized that it just didn't make any sense. So even like for something like Pan's Labyrinth, like again, an almost 20-year-old movie, there is still so much AI for that. And then if you have something that's not a 20-year-old movie, you have something that's contemporary, or you have something that's like it might be a car or an environment or something. Like it's genuinely really hard to see what's AI or not. I had this recently as well. I was working on Enter the Blender, a full new series for that, and I was modeling a house from really cute concept art, like on Google. I was modeling based on that, just lining it up, and then like a few hours in, I actually realized it was also AI, and it was kind of obvious in hindsight, I suppose. But again, a lot of low-res stuff pops up, right? The reason I realized it was that structurally the house didn't make sense. There were like light poles right outside the windows, but man, it's hard to see these kind of things. Matthew Keane is saying, this sculpt looks awesome so far. Thank you very much, Matthew. Really a big fan of your work. Been following your stuff for absolute years. Every time I play Civilization, I'm like, it's a Matthew sculpt. So I'm just trying to work over the shapes, just generally trying to work over everything. I think this is something that makes it look really nice and organic. Just trying to make the sculpts feel, or like the shapes feel like they belong. And one thing that I think is generally really useful, this is something I'm trying to teach my students as well, is there is a genuine flow in faces, in everything really. Like this is a design character, right? So this is a bit of a different kind of character, because it's not a real person. But if you are dealing with even with a real person, there's still a lot of these flows. In this case, you can see that there's a literal spiral, right? So these kind of flows are just really prominent. But even if we take away the spiral, notice here I have a shape like this, and this continues down here. This continues down here. If you focus on the flows of the face, of the flows of the body, basically the gesture, you just get so much more appeal right away. Like almost every single person is going to have flow to some degree like this. And this is where I like to call this art school bullshit lines. What this means is where, you have a painting, right? And somebody is just drawing like, rules of thirds, and they're like, this was definitely intentional. And they start to like do all this analysis over stuff. And some of this might be legit, some of it might be, but what I'm drawing now is just straight up tracing the model, right? And this is of course my model. So this is something that I'm very deliberately putting into it. But essentially the concept here is curve to curve. This is the overall concept. Essentially, the way you can simplify down a curve is that everything is a C curve. So every single shape you have is just a C curve. So you can have a C curve, it's called a C curve because it's shaped like a C, like this. And a straight line is a C curve in a sense that it's almost like if you were to take a C curve, right, and just make it less and less and less, it basically turns into a straight line. Then you have this curve here, it's an S curve, but this is a C curve and a C curve. And you have like all sorts of squiggly stuff, just a bunch of different C curves. So if you can break things down into C curves, you can genuinely get so much control over your art. So if you have the concept of just a C curve, then you can have curve to curve or a flow. So you can have a curve here, you can have a curve here and a curve here, and it's almost like it becomes a river, so that you can kind of just continue the flow in here. And you can just make something genuinely interesting. This is in the abstract, of course, but this is something that you can genuinely use to create gesture in a person. This is something I'm kind of doing now. I'm not very successful at the moment with the character because it's still early on, but I'm genuinely thinking about this. C, the C, the C, the C, and I'm just going to try to accentuate a lot of these ones here. So breaking things into Z-curves and thinking about the flow of the model is really, really, really handy. Here's a good one. What's wrong with using AI for ref? This is a really good question actually, because it's not necessarily obvious. Like, take away all the ethical concerns with AI. Like, you know, it's all of it is essentially trained on unauthorized data, even if they say it's not, right? It's all to some degree trained on data they don't have authorization to use. But it's the fact that it's not correct. It's the fact that if you were to be using, like I was mentioning before, I accidentally used an AI image of the fawn. It was incorrect. I was using a side view, and the side view for this looks like this currently, but the side view was like this before. It was straight up an incorrect image. And it was the same thing I was explaining with the house, where it was straight up inaccurate. Like the structure of the house wasn't correct. I would much rather have a rough sketch by a real person who thinks about these kind of things, instead of something that was like, it was a beautifully rendered house, the AI image, and the same thing with the fawn as well. It looked good, but it was structurally trash. So you want to be real careful with that. Essentially, if you were to be using something that's AI gen in a production, and you put in stupid stuff into your art or into your models because of that, like, it's just not going to reflect very nicely on you. Also, there's a very specific style to it, right? Like, you can very clearly tell, like, well, often you can tell when it's AI generated. And if you try to get that kind of stuff into your sculpts, man, it's just not very authentic. I think we're gonna basically end up with like human, or like handcrafted 3D or handcrafted arts and like synthetic art. So it's like, you just want to be sure that it feels like it's authentic. It's not even from a case of like purely from a artisan crafts point of view that we enjoy it. It's also just that, man, it just looks a lot better, right? It just, we just problem solve in a different way, instead of just going crazy with making stuff look nice, like quote unquote nice. We don't just want it to be visually appealing. We wanted to have a cohesive style over it. We want to belong in the world, and ultimately we want art to feel things. And if we can't feel things, then there's no point in art. Is the Blender series you're working on going to be a YouTube series or paid course? Yeah, it's going to replace the intro to Blender we currently have on Flip Normals, because that's done in 2.8, and tons of stuff has happened since then. So, and I've become a better teacher. I learned more about Blender. Obviously, it's been 5 years, so we just kind of basically remake that whole thing, but with like quite significant updates, like geometry nodes and all of that stuff. So yeah, it's going to be a brand new course, but we're also going to do a lot of stuff for YouTube for that as well. I really want to put out a lot of stuff on geometry nodes. Like, Morten has been really going ham on learning geometry nodes, so he has just picked up a lot of stuff there, so that's really cool. Here's a good one by Lass. How do you know when to stop with sculpted textures? Given the more you add, the more complicated it gets, and it covers covers key flowing forms and also removes eye resting space. Yeah, that's something that's really tricky. Basically, like, how this works is, when you have a character like this, you don't want to have details everywhere. So, you know, you can have, let's say it's like we add tons of pores to him, right? Like, there's just noise everywhere. You want to be able to control your texture. So if you have a drawing like this, right, and you just have tons of noise everywhere, then your eye doesn't generally have a place to rest. But if you have an area like this, where you're being like inside this circle, we don't have any texture. This can be like, in this case, right, it can be around the eyes, or it can be around the horns or something like that. It means that you're controlling the image a lot more. This is kind of like in theory, right? In practice, the way you do this is you take it into your favorite render engine. If it's, you know, if you work on a game, you put it into a game engine, and you just, like, maybe Marmoset, right, just for previewing, or whatever you prefer. In my case, I prefer to use Cycles or Arnold. So I just throw a model in there. I just I decimate the model, and I'll throw it into Arnold or Cycles in Blender, and I just do a test render, because this is not real life. What we're seeing in ZBrush is ZBrush. This is not this is not the final output for anything. So it's really important that you test stuff in a game engine or in a render. So this is what I do often. This is one of the things I always emphasize whenever I'm doing I'm doing courses, right? Like in all of the courses we're doing, if it has any newer texturing, you can very clearly see that early on, very early on, I'm always trying to do test renders, just because you're working completely blind. If not, a very standard workflow for this is we start off with like model, and then we do texture, and then we do shading. This could also be look dev, same thing really, LDev, and then we do a render, light and render and such. So light, comp, all that kind of stuff. But this is kind of a crappy way of doing it, because it doesn't work like the stuff isn't linear, because what you do in sculpting affects texturing. So let's say you're sculpting like tons of little pores here, like it becomes quite noisy in this area. This is going to make the whole thing really shiny, or like it's not going to make it shiny, it's going to break it up, so it's going to be really rough. If you don't have this and it's really smooth, it's going to be very shiny. So what you're doing here affects look dev in a very significant way. But if you don't think about this, then you're just going to be like, this area here needs, it's too shiny, let's just change the spec map or the reference map, right, to reflect that. But in reality, you can really just go in and just smooth the sculpting out, or you can try to modify that in a sculpt. So what I tend to do in the modeling stage, I tend to do basically first pass look dev, just to see what kind of works, put in a skin shader of it, because every single time you put something from ZBrush into any kind of shading, if it's Marmoset or Blender or Maya, anything like that, you always lose details, and you're working kind of blind at the moment, because you genuinely don't know what it's going to look like. Here's a good one by Eric. Question about portfolio building. How do you best demonstrate variety with Unity? For example, in a 10-piece portfolio, is only one fantasy creature enough to truly demonstrate ability? I would say that 10 pieces, this of course depends heavily on what level you're at. So a student portfolio is very, very different from professional portfolio, because student portfolio is going to be mostly personal work or student work, collaborative stuff, while professional one is going to be, movies or games. So it's a very different one. But I would say 10 is probably way too many. Like then most likely you could have made 3-4 pieces and just amped up the quality like crazy. What I would say is I also think about Unity with variation. So figure out, not Unity as a software, but Unity as the opposite of chaos, I suppose. Figure out what you want to do. So essentially, that's the worst square anyone has ever drawn. I do apologize. Figure out what you want to do. Let's say this is like you want to be a character artist, right? For a nice little example. That means everything you're doing is within the character art. Like over here is rigging. Over here is anim. Over here is like CFX or something. And here's lighting, right? You want to be sure you don't touch these ones, because that's not your thing. If you want to do rigging, you need to do rigging. You need to do rigging real, or you need to do a CFX real, anim real. You want to be sure what you're showing is here. But within this, you need to show range. So let's say you're only doing like the fawn here, right? Like this might be up here. This might be like fantasy, and it's creature. So it's like up here. Let's say you do a troll next, and it's also fantasy and it's creature. Then you do a goblin next, and it's fantasy and creature. Cool. You have 3 pieces that they might look great, but if you can do a fawn well, you can do a troll well, you can do a goblin well, right? So then what's the point of the other ones? Sure, they do show more things, but you generally show fundamentally the same thing. But what you can do instead, you can go the other way. You can make like photorealistic human. And this is just this, you might not be interested in this, but this is showing a whole different thing. And then you can show something that is like maybe this is an original design. You could show like maybe a character that's based on concept art, but it might be, maybe it's costume design or something. So maybe you're doing something marvelous designer, and maybe over here you're dealing with a mech or something, right? So you can show that you have some hard surface skills, because it's always useful. You can show original creature designs, you can show humans, and you can show, all the different things. So I really think it's important to figure out what are kind of defense posts around it. and these are defense books, right? To make sure you're in creature art, and then within this, figure out what makes you employable. I really think it's important to have unity with variety. If you don't, then you're just going to keep making the same stuff over and over and over again. And if you have somebody who has variety, showing that they can do hard surface, realistic humans, clothing, and creature art, that's just a lot more valuable, just from a purely like commercial point of view, than somebody who can do like one thing really well. Like if you're way too specialized, meaning that the one thing you can do is you can do creatures, but you haven't shown that you know how to do humans or anything like that. So there just aren't that many creature positions, right? Where the only thing you sculpt are creatures. It might be that, well, we have 2 months of just human, or 2 months of just have to do some hard surface, right? Like it's just how it works in reality. It's not a fantasy world where you can just make monsters all day long. That's just quite difficult. It's not impossible, but it is just quite difficult to find those positions. What if you're modeling a scorpion or something where they have pores all over them? What do you do a resting space for that? Well, it's the same thing. Everything have pores all over. Like it's like a human will also have that. Like this character here is going to have that, but it can be it can be that you make them stronger or weaker in certain spaces, or in certain places, or it can be that you play with a roughness value. They're super shiny in one area, they're super rough in another area. It can be that there is a lot of color variety in one area and not the other. So it's all about like getting into looked at and just genuinely getting feedback from that. Also, this is the most annoying bug in the history of the world, where it just shoots up diagonally. If you're having that, you are not alone. I just want to do creature work. I find human stuff incredibly boring. I mean, that's fine if that's the only thing you want to do. But then if you only want to do creature work, you just have to be really good at that, because it's the more specialized you become like that, the more of a high barrier of entry there is to it. Like it doesn't matter if somebody wants to do something. It's like if there aren't any jobs like looking for creature people like that. It's also one of the things when it comes to character work, it is fundamentally more of a senior position, because to put it like this, if you're let's say you look in your room right now and there are so many things, there are so many props there most likely, right, that if you were to have a video game or a commercial or something, a lot of these props are kind of simple to make, and if you were to screw them up, it's not the end of the world. It might be background props or something. Let's say you screw up building a pair of glasses or like a bottle or something, right? Worst case, somebody will just kind of take it over, or it's just gonna not gonna look that amazing. But characters are just different beasts. It's not even a prestige thing or anything. It's just that they are legit really hard. You need to understand anatomy. You don't need to understand anatomy in order to sculpt a bottle or to make a bottle. It's just observe what's there, line it up to some reference, and then just model that, right? But for characters and creatures, you need to understand a lot about anatomy. That takes a long time to learn. You need to understand a lot about sculpting. You need to understand a lot about the tech as well, because if you want to do only character or creatures, and particularly if you don't want to deal with topology or anything like that, then it's even harder, because you as a character artist, you're actually dealing a lot with technical things as well. Like let's say the UVs are updated, and you might have your general model, right, and this one here might have different versions. So you have anim, which is a very low res. You might have rig, which is maybe like a mid, and you have like a render, which is quite heavy. You might have effects, which is, it might be a whole different build for this, and all of these are sharing UVs, and maybe the rig has a whole different UV set. So it just becomes really difficult if you need to change something. Let's say the topology changes. Why does the topology change? Well, maybe with the horn needs to go from here to like here. You probably just have to change the topology. The vert order changes. You have to propagate this into all of these different things. That's not trivial, because you're also dealing with a pipeline as well, and a pipeline can be quite heavy to work with. So you have to have a very well-rounded understanding of how everything connects up. So if you only want to be like a ZBrush cowboy, then, or only want to sculpt or something, it's just legitimately really difficult. It's not impossible. There are people who only do creatures. It's just a lot harder. And particularly if you're, like, again, you have to be real hot shit for that. Like, you genuinely just have to be to a level where you're pretty much world class at that, because otherwise, why would they pick you, right? Then you would rather pick somebody who can do all the different things, because it's so much easier to hire somebody who's well-rounded. So here's a question by Sunav. So you wouldn't advise juniors to stick to creature character work, which should focus more on simpler things, like you said, background props, objects? Not necessarily. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be like, oh, it's impossible to become a character artist. I'm not saying that at all. Like, it's possible. I've seen it plenty of times with people, right? Like, it's obviously doable to do, but I am saying that you need to be smart about it. So if you want to be a pure creature artist or character artist, I think it's a very good idea you need to, of course, be excellent at that, but I think it's a very good idea to show like some hard surface in your reel as well, or in your portfolio. Show that you know how to do other stuff. If you want to be a character artist, I don't think you should go in as an environmental artist or a pure prop artist. I think you should go for a creature artist, but I do think that you need to be clever about it and be like, just realizing that there just generally aren't that many entry-level creature artist positions or character artist positions out there. There just aren't that many character artist positions out there in general. So just be clever about it. Just work create your portfolio in a manner, create your skills in a manner that makes it easy to keep you employed, or to first off hire you, but then at the same time where you can gear your career towards doing characters and creature art. I think that's really important, because like, you can, like, 100% people can do creature art, can do character art, but it's the whole thing, right? Like, people want to join ILM or Pixar right out of school. It happens. It does happen, and people do that, but it's not the norm. For most people at ILM or Pixar, it's not their first job. Most people doing characters and creature art, it's not their first position in the industry. Like, very, very few people have that as their first thing. There are some people who do, but that's really, really, really the exception and not the norm. So like, I'm not gonna try to like kill anyone's dreams or anything. Just be clever about it, essentially. One piece of advice as well, I actually want to make a short story or short about this, or maybe even a full one, is I think it's a good idea to go absolute overkill for portfolio pieces. So instead of doing just kind of the bare minimum, what you think kind of works, I think it's a good idea just to do something that's absolutely insane, assuming of course you have the time for it. So if you have a piece like this, which has all the intricacies of this, you really treat every single thing as something that needs to work. I think that would kind of be a definition of overkill, where it would just mean that people are looking at your work and go like, holy crap, that's legit impressive, because this takes a lot of time. So instead of doing like a lot of kind of mediocre pieces or like mid pieces, just spend a lot of time making like a few pieces that just blows people's socks off. There is a thing in magic, right? Like, people are doing like performance magic, where one of the things, is something I learned from a Penn and Teller watching their show, is that a lot of that comes down to spending more time on something that most people wouldn't find to be a reasonable amount of time, like spending 300 hours on a single card trick, right? It's the same thing with this. If you can just spend a lot more effort in something that what people might assume to be reasonable, you're just going to end up with an absolute killer piece. I've seen this with a fair few people I've known in the industry, and they sculpted some insane stuff, like some really impressive scaly characters, maybe like dinosaurs or crocodiles and that. And I was kind of asking them, like, so how did you do that? Like, what was your technique? Like, because, there's so many ways you can do Mari projections and sculpt on top, or texture XYZ and stuff. And they were like, man, I just sculpted it. Didn't that take forever? Yep, just took forever. And that can kind of be one of your superpowers, that you're willing to just put in an insane amount of time on something that other people would kind of get bored of. Let's say you do have a crocodile style character in your portfolio, and you can just genuinely make that look phenomenal. Awesome. Because most people will kind of try to make some silly tileables and kind of try to make that work, but if you can just go overkill and just make that truly look spectacular, Most people aren't going to do that. Bouncing off the previous question, as an aspiring character artist, is it inadvisable to show work in a portfolio showing the full pipeline? Should a character artist only show sculpts? I don't think you should show only sculpts. Also, it depends on a character artist, right? Because there is a bit of a difference between games and movies and commercials and all that. So it depends a bit on that. But I think it's a good idea to show characters that have, where you do the sculpt, retopology, the texturing and the shading, and then final rendering for it, just to make sure it's nice. But I don't think there's any point in showing that you do the rigging yourself, because then that's a whole rabbit hole, which is really difficult to do. Like just learning rigging to a level where you can sculpt, you can rig something like this, takes ages, and there is no overlap between these positions. The overlap might be that you need to do face shapes, right, for a character like this, which is, you know, there is some rigging to that, but there isn't really an overlap between these positions. So if you want to do, like, just be sure you don't screw around with like animation or anything like that, because frankly, it's gonna suck. It's just gonna look really bad unless you are an animator. Like, don't try to do animation. I'm not even trying to be discouraging or something. It's just that it's just genuinely not a skill that you can just kind of wing. Like if you have an excellent sculpt and you have excellent textures, you can kind of get by with with shading, right? Like you can kind of figure that out yourself, but you cannot just kind of wing animation. It's a whole different thing. It would be like, let's say you're a lighter on set on a movie, and you know, you can kind of do a lot of different things. You can rig up things, maybe you can do a bit of basic carpentry and all that kind of stuff, but you can't just suddenly act or compose music. It's a whole different skill, in the same way that the actors can't just suddenly do a bit of like lighting or carpentry. Right? It's a whole different thing. So I think it's a very good idea to focus on modeling, sculpting, texturing, shading. UV mapping, of course, that goes into that. Okay, time to spend months just working on making and detailing scales on a Triceratops head I'm working on. Yeah, go for it, man. I you know, be smart about it. Don't like, make sure you have the skills to actually pull it off, right? But you may not know that until you've done it. So I recommend doing a vertical slice of it. Basically what this means is you can do kind of a horizontal slice, which is you do the character to like 20-30%, right? The whole thing. And this means you can have something that doesn't look particularly good, but it's going to kind of work. Like, meaning like the body here is at like the 10% mark, 20% mark at most. But I can kind of figure out the proportions and such, right? I can kind of get a feel of the character, but the head is more of a vertical slice. But you can even do a more finished version of this. You can do like, take the face, retop it, take it through texturing, just so you can figure out the workflow. Because if you can't figure out the workflow for this, you can't figure out the rest. So it's the same thing if you're doing a Triceratops. Then figure out, like, the scales are always a challenge. So figure out just a workflow for that before you start to do the whole thing, even like the whole head, because some stuff when it comes to scales, you can probably get away with doing tilables, like put them into Painter or Mari and just kind of throw them in there and experiment with that, experiment with Looktap. Some of the stuff you need to sculpt as well. So figure that out, and just do a vertical slice, because it's genuinely really hard to make a whole character if you haven't done it before, right? Hey, what is the best approach for making renders of high poly sculpts? Yeah, there are a few different methods for it. The simplest one is that you go to ZBrush and you go to Decimation Master and you just hit one of these buttons here, where you can just set this to a percentage. This is just going to decimate your model, which means that it's going to preserve the high frequency details, but it's going to drastically reduce it. So it drastically reduce the poly count. So you can just kind of export out the model. Might be like, it's still 1,000,000 polys, but you just throw that into cycles, you throw it into Arnold, and just kind of render it. That's going to kind of work. Another way to do it is, the more production friendly way of doing it is, you retopologize your model, you UV map it, you export out a displacement map, which you can do from C plugin, multi-map exporter right here. and then you set up a displacement or vector disp, and then you go with that. And then you export that out. The advantage of that is that, well, you can deform the character afterwards. This is how it's done in production. Well, in film production, right? You wouldn't use disp maps for games, but you can deform them, and it's just a lot lighter on your work on your actual system, because the viewport doesn't have like millions of polygons. The disadvantage is that you legit need a lot more things for it to work, right? You can't just do simple tests with that, because you have to set up the topology, the UV map, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, pros and cons, that's one way of doing it. This is how I'm often doing it, to be honest. I just kind of decimate my models and I just kind of throw them into Arnold or into cycles. So I'm going to show you guys a few products now that are pretty cool. Just give me a second. Yeah, but just keep the questions coming. It's really cool to have proper questions. These are all really good. All right, cool. So here's some stuff that we have. So this is Mandarin was in the chat earlier, which is really cool to see. So this is our most recent course made by Mandarin, who's absolutely fantastic. So this is a really good course for just learning basically everything there is to know about modeling, talking about topology, UV mapping, how to work in a production setting. So I highly recommend this course. I watched the whole thing. It's genuinely really good. So check this out here. Link in the chat. And then we have Intro to Anatomy. This is one I made. I'm going to send this over. This is one I made last year. This is one that I made myself, so by yours truly. This is one where we cover anatomy from a practical point of view. We do cover basically all the muscles, but I'm really focusing on the workflow, really making sure that you can do it in a practical manner, because my god, anatomy is difficult. So instead of just going through absolutely every single muscle, every single tendon and all that kind of stuff, which, yes, again, we do that up here, but it's more focusing on the important stuff. This is what I was talking about before, right? Like the whole, like, the ridge muscles. Yes, it's important to know about the brachioradialis and extensor carpi radialis longus, which is a mouthful, but you can just kind of simplify them into the ridge muscles. Here's my hand on my balcony. So we're just focusing on, genuinely on anatomy, on functional anatomy. A bit about the gesture of the body as well. Just focus on the different things. So we try to essentially make a course that truly focuses on anatomy, but not insane in the way that a lot of courses are taught. Because a lot of people, they're just going in, all right, cool, let's get to start with the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and you're like, the sterno what? Sorry, and you can just look at this. No, sternocleidomastoid. Sterno is from the sternum. Cleido is from the clavicle, and the mastoid goes here. So we try to break it down into really simple and easy to understand things, focusing on their general recipe. So yeah, this is a course I really do recommend. So yeah, like Adam is saying, highly recommend the second one here. Like, yeah, pretty happy with the ratings for this one. So yeah, it's basically out of 5-star now. So that's pretty good. Then we have the iKit. The iKit is, I think, is pretty much an essential product for character artists. I use this for all my characters. This is also the same thing here. This is essentially a full VFX quality iKit. This is also for games as well. So if you want to have just drag and drop eyes that works for this, then I think this is pretty much as good as it's going to get. If somebody can find a better iKit available commercially online, let me know. But I haven't been able to find that. So this is what we use for all our products, all our renders. I saw in VFX when I was there, so at one of the studios, we were making a new eye for the VFX company, and this I legit think is better than that. Like, it's pretty nuts how close up we can get with this. So yeah, very, 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 very happy with the iKit. Absolutely, absolutely phenomenal kit. It literally is drag and drop it in. This is set up for Blender, set up for Maya already, so you can just straight up drag and drop the files, but also it works for like all other software as well. Also, it's set up for Marmoset, but for the other software, you just have to import the files and set up the shaders yourself, but it comes with all the materials, like the sclera, the white stuff, the iris, it comes with displacement, all this kind of good stuff. And then the last thing I want to talk about now is Intro to Sculpting. So this is a universal course. This is a few years old now, but it doesn't really matter because the software is entirely agnostic. This is where we focus just on sculpting concepts, because people talk about these buttons, what does a lightbox or the subdivision stuff do, and all of that stuff is of course handy, but nobody really talks about the sculpting workflow and how to approach sculpting. So I genuinely think this here is like a really, really helpful course. This is the one I've been recommending to, also made by myself as well. This is the one I've been recommending to people when they need to, they kind of know ZBrush and they want to get started with something more advanced. Here we're covering mid-frequency as well, wrinkles. So yeah, this I do recommend. All these are 40% off as well, so just check out this in the chat. So we are going to go back to sculpting now. So if there are any questions there, just send them again, because I completely missed that because I was talking about cool courses. So yeah, these are like, whenever it comes to making a course like this, like Intro to Sculpting, Intro to Anatomy, all that kind of stuff, this is stuff that I kind of make them, honestly, like the target audience is honestly myself from years back. It would be like, I wish I had this knowledge when I started out, and then I genuinely try to make that something that I would have appreciated. Like, how do you learn anatomy? I remember when I was starting in anatomy at some point, I just opened up an anatomy book and I just started memorizing the muscles of the fingers, which is absolute nonsense way of doing it because it doesn't matter, right? So that's the wrong way of doing it, because it would be like, oh, you want to learn French, open a dictionary and just start memorizing the words. Turns out though, that like with learning a language, you use the same words over and over and over again. It's something like if you were to learn like 2,000-3,000 words, you can communicate a lot of different things. Sure, you need a lot more than that, but in order to just communicate the basics, you can get by with quite a rudimentary base. And it's the same with sculpting as well. Yes, you can memorize every single muscle, every single shape, all the bones, all the muscles. But from a practical point of view, you don't need that, because you just keep using the same stuff over and over and over again. And this means as well that the stuff you do, like when you start to learn anatomy, you're frankly going to forget a lot of it. It's the same if you're learning a language. You're straight up going to just forget a lot of it, but if you aren't using it. But that's the beauty of it. When you focus only on what's useful, you're going to find that all of it is relevant. And if there is something you keep forgetting, probably it might not even be that useful. Like one of the examples is here with the forearm, right? Like I keep forgetting the names of some of these muscles here because it's just pretty much, it's been insane, right? Like when it comes to all these brachioradialis and extensor carpi radialis brevis and extensor carpi radialis longus and the extensor digitorum, digiti minimum, all that kind of stuff, right? It's just been insane. And but what I tend to remember is the overall structure of things, and you know that's when it becomes useful. I think it can be a bit detrimental to memorize all the anatomical names because you just confuse yourself instead of finding it to be very useful to focus on the main shapes. So let me actually show you the forearm here. That's kind of what I was talking about before. A way to simplify this down is that in here we have the humerus, which is shaped basically kind of like this. Bit of a stylized way of doing it, but it's a ball up here and then it goes out into these two things. So we have this shape here, and then we have this is the ulna, this is the bone in your forearm, and this here is essentially the elbow. So from this we can kind of do most of the arm, of the forearm. So what we can do, we can go in here, we can essentially just make from this point, kind of just make like a elongated shape here, and this goes in here. We can kind of make an elongated shape from here, and this goes in here. And then from up here, we can just kind of make a shape that goes like this and it goes over like so. Not 100% true, but you don't need 100% true because you can't see this kind of stuff anyway, meaning that unless you're sculpting an anatomy model or somebody who has 0% fat or is a cadaver or something, like you legit can't see all these muscles. So I find it to be much more useful to think about these kind of shapes as bigger volumes. I also think if you do focus too much on the muscles, it's going to look very anatomical, which isn't great. As an example here is you might start to sculpt something like this where you can see all the individual things and focusing on all the muscles and all this kind of stuff, when in reality this kind of stuff is kind of like a sausage. It's kind of like it goes from thick to thin. Same thing here, it might go from thick to thin in here, and then you can kind of break it up. If you genuinely focus too much on anatomy, it can actually look worse as well. Like I'm looking at my own arm right now, like here, this is actually a bit of a mistake in this case. See how flat it is here? Might be more anatomical in terms of the muscles, but this needs to be rounder just because based on observation, right? Why is it round? Doesn't matter. It just is. So you just need to focus on anatomy to a practical point of view. But going too overkill at it, I legit think it's going, like, might actually harm you. Because it's like, sure, the more you know about it, the better it might be long term, but you need to understand the core volumes of this. Otherwise, you're just going to be in a lot of trouble in terms of like that. A lot of trouble in the sense that the stuff isn't going to look good, and that is the most important part. If it doesn't look good, what are we even doing? I'm going to just dynamesh this up. Just playing around with the resolution. I also think something you have to do when you want to get good at sculpting is, you know, I kind of, you know, make a living out of tutorials, but man, you gotta not just watch tutorials all day long, except for flipping almost once, of course, but you gotta genuinely just sculpt a lot. I find tutorials to be very useful, like Intro to Sculpting, Intro to Anatomy as like a starting point, but you're not gonna like become a character artist by buying a course or buying a book or something, or by reading it or watching or something. It's the same thing. Like if I were to buy a book on maths, I'm not gonna learn maths. I have to just solve a lot of equations. I have to just keep drilling stuff over and over and over again. So I think that's really key, that you genuinely have to just practice a lot. Like you have to practice to a point where this kind of stuff becomes just intuitive, because if not, then you'll have tons of theoretical knowledge, but this is not a theoretical craft. It's so annoying when I see that sculpting or character art or CG is taught as almost as an academic discipline in schools, instead of as how I think it should be taught, which is as a craft, as if you're literally learning carpentry. CG, sculpting, character art, really anything here is straight up carpentry. It's you're building something. It needs to be of a certain standard. Sure, it's not going to kill somebody if you screw it up, unlike carpentry, but you're still fundamentally a builder. So it needs to be treated as such. How would you, and then you can kind of think about all that. If you accept my thinking that it's essentially a trade, you might not, but if you do, and then, all right, cool, so how do you teach carpentry? You don't teach carpentry by reading books. You teach carpentry by just building a lot of different things, just by building. And the advantage we have, which carpenters don't have, is we have infinite materials. We don't have to buy clay, or we don't have to buy wood or buy tools or anything. Sure, you need your computer and such, but it's not like your tablet like your tablet's gonna last for years and years and years. Computer is gonna last for years. So yeah, we basically have infinite materials, which is awesome. Looks like this guy has 4 nipples. That's weird. Didn't notice that until now. Guess that is how it is. What the Dynamesh resolution is best to work with? Yeah, it depends on your mesh, because it's based on scale. So you can't really have a resolution. You need to. It's more like a poly count, but even that depends just on your mesh. Like there is really no way to give you a number there. It generally just depends on what you're sculpting. For some you need a high, for some you need a low, and also depends on when you're sculpting as well, right? Like if you're at what stage you're at. So yeah, there is just no. It's one of those annoying ones. It genuinely just depends, and it's impossible to do it. It's like, how much does a stone weigh, or how long is a string? Well, you know, depends on the stone, depends on the string. What I find to be really useful when learning anything is to genuinely try to analyze your mistakes. Like when you're doing a sculpt and you're just focusing on learning, just figure out how to improve it and then put that on a board, put it in a post-it note, put that next to your screen. You might even have it on the bottom of the screen, put post-it notes there. And just like if you're having issues with like maybe silhouette, just add a note saying, remember the silhouette, and then just go through it. And then you just keep improving or focusing on your weakness. And if you do that a lot, you're just gonna develop a lot of really high quality skills. Is there a reason you used a red matte cap instead of a grey one? Yeah, this is not a red matte one. This is a custom one, which I got years ago. This is a the red one is this one, and this is the ugliest material ever made. So let's actually talk about this one. It's an insanely ugly one, but what's kind of handy about this one is that if you see it as a pure sculpting material, it's crazy ugly. But if you see it as a utility, basically as a tool, it's crazy useful because it allows you to see stuff you can't otherwise see. So for instance, if I switch to this one here or this one here, this is so soft, so it hides a lot of mistakes. So what I tend to do is I tend to switch to one of these ones, maybe like something crazy, just so you can genuinely see what's going on, and then you can try to fix mistakes. But yeah, these ones are quite nice as well, but you know, they don't in ZBrush by default. The advantage of the basic matte, which I use a lot, is that, you check this out, if you go to lighting, or if you just here, you can change it. So you can change the lighting around. This is not something you can do with the matte caps, because matte caps are, well, captured. Well, this is an actual interactive light, so this is really handy, but honestly, I think it just looks better. Like for me, having something nice to look at, if I'm going to spend hours on it, it's kind of important in a sense. So yeah, I just like to have something pretty to look at. This one is also quite nice, the Red Chavant one. Just going to try to find the reference I was using before. It's going to be this one here. And this may or may not be good ref. I mean, who really knows if this is going to work or not? It might just be a bit noisy. But yeah, also left and right side are a bit different. So there is that. But I'm going to not worry about that. I do know if there's a performance difference between matte caps and basic materials. As far as I know, there is no performance issues with that. There's no performance differences between those. So just use whatever you want to. If there is, it's entirely negligible. So just use the tools that makes you happy, to be honest. As long as it's not like a crazy one, because then you actually can't see your model. So I think it's really important to do what we talked about before in the stream, which is bring your models into a render engine of choice. Honestly, all render engines are kind of the same today. Like if you're using Cycles or Arnold or Marmoset or whatever, like they're all really high quality, and you can fundamentally get the same result from all of them. So use whatever you prefer. Like I can get pretty much the exact same result from Arnold as I can in Cycles or Marmoset or V-Ray or anything like that. How long will this stream be? I am not entirely sure. Until it gets too warm in my living room for me to stream, I suppose. I'm generally trying to get in some of these patterns here as well. This is tricky because it's a bit of a wacky looking pattern. But what I'm doing now, I'm just truly observing. I'm just genuinely looking at this, and I don't care about the anatomy or anything. I just have to get in these shapes. Even though you've been using ZBrush for ages, how do you feel about its accessibility in relation to something like Blender, since it's built on a different paradigm than other 3D software? ZBrush is awesome for sculpting, but it's a weird software. It takes time to learn, but at the same time is also by far the most powerful sculpting software in terms of like pure performance, right? Like it's not even up for debate. It's just much faster than Blender for sculpting. I try to undo in Blender, right? You do a stroke and it takes a long time to undo, but also just like you don't have layers. It's so much more feature rich what we have in what we have in ZBrush compared to Blender. Blender does have a lot of advantages though for sculpting, which ZBrush doesn't have. Is that first, it has like real cameras, so you can actually like look through different cameras at the same time, which is fantastic. So it has advantages like that. But if you're doing hardcore sculpting, meaning if you want to be a professional character artist, I highly recommend getting into ZBrush. I think it's a very, very good idea. It's just a more responsive tool. It's also what everyone is using. Like there might be some dudes here and there who try to sculpt with Blender, but like ZBrush is generally a better tool for sculpting, in the same way that Blender is generally a better tool for lighting or animation or rigging, right? It's just a specialized tool, and seems to me that sculpting in Blender is not in active development anymore after Pablo left. So I don't really, like, it's one of the things was so years ago, right? When it was like legit in active development, and it was new stuff every single week. It was awesome. But just because it happened then does not mean it's going to continue to happen. There is no reason to assume that ZBrush is going to be overtaken by Blender at any point in the future. Like, the amount of work that would require is actually insane. Like, how could it? Like, how could it do that when this is a specialist software? I don't even think it should, because it means it would have to spend so much effort on like very specific things. Yeah, it's really hard to find even developers who could do a sculpting thing, because in order to develop that, you need kind of somebody who's a unicorn like Pablo was, or is, I suppose, where you need to be really, really good at sculpting, because otherwise you're kind of working in a blind. Or you need somebody who is really passionate about sculpting but doesn't really know sculpting, right? So then you need a sculptor to really help them all the time. Or also you have the case that if you're a really good developer like that, I'm sure you can make a lot more money doing something else. Sure, it's not that everything in the world is about money, but I mean, if you get a good offer, right, you get a good offer. Are you going to use other rendering software besides Substance Painter? I was thinking of switching software. Like Painter isn't really a render engine. It does have a render engine, but it's, that's just a preview engine, really. Like, it's a decent engine, but you don't really have any control, so definitely do something else. Do you ever use ZBrush for hard surface? Nope. I don't. I really don't like ZBrush for hard surface. It's not that it's bad. My personal preference is to use something where I control a little bit more. If you were to do something really wacky, like if I need to do something insane like Doom design or something, I would probably do that. But I don't really see any reason personally to use ZBrush for hard surface. For me, it's the same thing as using Blender for sculpting. Like, I would use Blender or Maya for hard surface, and I would use ZBrush for sculpting. Just use whatever tool is best for the job. Yeah, plasticity looks really good. It looks like a really cool addition. It's really cool when there's new software coming out, like plasticity. It looks really, really, really good for hard surface. Could you tell me how to control the volume of detail after sculpting primary and secondary blocks? My god, I wish I could, but that is like a 3-hour course by itself. Honestly, that's just too elaborate of a question for me to really answer. So unfortunately, I can't really answer that. It's just, yeah, that's basically like how it's such a wide one. So it's a legit really good question. It's just too broad, unfortunately. So you can see how I'm blocking in these kind of shapes, just straight up just blocking them in one brush. I also really like this brush. I'm so happy about this one. Hopefully we, at some point we'll hopefully get this out publicly. I'm just experimenting with like a brush pack as well. So seeing if I can make something cool. If I can't make something cool, we might just release this one here for free, because you know, it needs to be better than what's there. We're not just gonna release some crap just to have a brush pack. It needs to be like the stuff I was showing you before, like the eye kit and such, where I genuinely believe in the product. Like it's not like you don't have to sell something that you believe in. I'm not doing marketing for the eye kit. I'm just using it myself and telling people, hey, I used this, and then showing what I did with it. So yeah, we want to just be sure that the stuff we're producing is legit really good content. And this one here, I've used this for like maybe 6 months now, and keep using it, so then I can quite confidently say that this brush is pretty good. Yeah, it's just a custom alpha. I think I modified a few things for it, but it's just a custom alpha. Like, you can check it out here. This looks like this. But looks simple, but it's the same thing, right? If you look at the damn standard, it's just this alpha here. But it's down to subtle things. Very subtle changes can have a big impact on sculpt and what something feels like when sculpting. Snakehook is so good. I really like Snakehook with Sculptors Pro. I'm just gonna get out some of these things here. What you can do as well, you can mask things off like this. Just hold the control key, mask, and then just go zoop. Now we get nice sharp shapes as well. Yeah, Sculptors Pro is great. Really like this tool. But yeah, whatever questions you guys have. Really good discussion so far in the chat. Really enjoying this. How important is it to show topology, wireframes, and character reveal? I would say it's quite important. It's not that, like, topology is not even like the most difficult thing to learn. I generally don't think topo is that hard to get right, but you need to show that you're not just a ZBrush cowboy, because that's one of the fears of companies, that somebody comes in and they only know how to use ZBrush. They only know how to do like Dynamesh or Zero Mesh and that kind of stuff, right? And if you're a character artist, you need to be able to do retopology. Like that's like a complete prerequisite to being a character artist. And I don't think I would hire, if I was responsible for hiring, I don't think I would hire a character artist who didn't show wireframes in their reel or in their portfolio, because it would be like, why aren't they doing that? Doesn't even have to be fancy. You don't really have to spend that much time on it per se. Just make sure the topology is sound, is solid. You don't, like, meaning spend time on making topology nice, but you don't have to spend all the time in the world on the wireframe. You know, just have a wireframe shot that looks decent, and then go from there. I'm just trying to get into overall shapes now. And since this is a pretty weird looking character, I think I can get away with a lot of different things. It just has to feel like the same character. Is ArtStation still a good place to host your portfolio, or is it better to use a personal website? Well, I would say avoid using a personal website at any cost, if at all possible, because, I mean, whatever concerns we have at ArtStation, I think using a personal website is a really bad idea, because most personal websites just kind of suck. Honestly, most people are not good at making personal websites, so ArtStation is still standardized. If you send me an ArtStation link, I know how to access it. I know there's not going to be any password silliness. I know you're not going to forget to renew the domain or anything like that. So you just want to make it easy for people reviewing your stuff, right? So there aren't really a lot of alternatives right now. I think you have like the Kara app, but it's still, I haven't really looked into that, but it's still in its infancy. You'd want to be sure that your portfolio is something that is on a trusted platform that doesn't, potentially go down or something like that. I will also recommend avoiding Instagram for a portfolio as well, just because people might have to log into it or to even see it. It's really annoying if somebody sends an Instagram link and you have to check it on desktop and you have to log into it just to see what's going on, because you have to do that in order to see most posts there. You can maybe see the top ones, but yeah, try to avoid Instagram as well. Like, Instagram is fine as a as a marketing tool, but as a portfolio piece, I really think it's best to use like just something simple. ArtStation is fine like that. Why isn't Sculpt Pro used all the time? Well, the reason is that it makes it gives you local topology and it can get very, very, very heavy. So I prefer to just use it when I need it. Like here I needed to extrude some stuff, right? Then I'm just gonna extrude some stuff. Speaking of, I want to extrude a bit of a elbow here. So then I can use snake hook. There we go, and then we can do this, and we can just make this go out. But yeah, then I use this with, I'll dynamesh this later on. So we can do this, just get it out, and then we just dynamesh it, and then we disable Sculpt Pro. It's just a way to add geometry to it. Nothing too fancy, really. This is kind of what I was talking before, if somebody's still watching from that, when I said like, do something that's overkill. If you were to sculpt all this kind of stuff in and do a genuinely really good job of that, that's kind of, in my book, overkill, because it's quite insane to do that, because it's going to take a long time to really get all this kind of stuff in. But if you do it, it's going to look fantastic. I might do it. I'm not sure. I'm not even sure if I'm going to use the body or not. I might not. I might not show the feet. Not entirely sure, actually. But I'm enjoying this so far. So far so good. Just gonna freestyle a little bit here, trying to have the same feeling for it. Masking is so powerful like this. You can just really make some interesting shapes with this. But this is all just dynamesh, or not even dynamesh at this point. I'm just moving topology around. So yeah, I haven't really dynamesh this. You can just get really cool shapes with this. But yeah, just as a reminder that we have a massive summer sale going on at the moment, so just check out flipmoments.com and yeah, see if there are any cool products there. Should have. We have almost 40,000 products on sale. Yesterday it was 36,000 products on sale, so quite a lot. So we have a lot of really good stuff now, a lot of really good tutorials. It's been really fun seeing the site just grow, getting more and more high quality creators. How long do you usually spend on a character sculpt before going into retopo? Man, I tend to spend a lot of time on it. I would nowhere near ready for this. I would spend at least a few more full days of sculpting before I'm even close to retopology for this, because yeah, if you do it prematurely, then you have to redo it basically. Like then you're gonna have to fix so many things, and the more areas you have to fix, the more annoying it's gonna get. So just make one absolute killer sculpt and then do retopo for it. But you shouldn't do too much details before doing retopo, right? It's a tricky thing when it comes to retopo, how much detail you should put into it. Because if you do too many details, if you put too many details into it, then the issue is that you always have issues with reprojecting. Let's say you get to a pore level. Like this is a good level, right? I have some details, but I don't really have pores yet. If you start to put pores and you start to put everything in there, you have to use layers. All the layers are going to disappear whenever you project it back again. So it's just really annoying dealing with that, but also you might have to resculpt things. There's always some silliness when it comes to resculpting. So if you know you're going to have to resculpt it, you might as well just do it after the retopology. Also because tertiary details like pores and tiny scales and such is not really going to matter anyway for the shape, so you can retopology as before, but you really want to be sure that the overall design is working. Again, what I have here is way, way too early. Here's one. I'm new to ZBrush, even after I learn how to use it, but I'm still lacking in motivation just because I think I am great at it. Any advice on how to get better? Yeah, you just have to do it a lot. You just have to practice a lot. But I do recommend some of the courses I was mentioning before as well. Like if you haven't checked out this course here, I recommend this course here, Intro to Anatomy, and we have another one, Intro to Sculpting as well, which I'll send in a sec. These two really work hand in hand. Let's see if I can find it. Intro to Sculpting, Intro to Anatomy. See here, Intro to Sculpting. Here we go. So it's really hard to learn a lot of this kind of stuff by yourself. So these two courses are definitely going to help, but there's no substitute for just going ham and just practicing. Like, you really just need a lot of practice, but you have to practice correctly, and that's one of the tricky things. If you just were to sculpt and do it for 10 hours a day without reference and without really evaluating your own skill set, then you're kind of wasting your time to a degree. So I think it's really important that you practice with structure. So a structure can be one way to learn anatomy, for instance, which is super hardcore, but it's a very effective way. Try to sculpt a realistic body without reference. And then you try to sculpt a realistic body with reference. Then you try to sculpt it again. You just keep looping back and forth, basically with no ref and then with ref, no ref with ref. The reason that is so incredibly effective is because it really exposes all your mistakes, all your flaws. So when you sculpt without ref, you genuinely get to see all the stuff you don't understand. You get to see that, oh crap, I have no idea what's going on with the arm here. Or if you're trying to name it as well, like particularly if you're trying to name it, you're just going to realize that, my God, you genuinely don't know a lot about anatomy. And that's awesome, because every single time you do it, you improve a little bit. Another one can be trying to, like, buying a scan, and like from 3D Scan Store, or by like creators like 3D.sk, which we have tons of their scans on Flip Normals, and then just sculpting based on the scan. The advantage of sculpting based on scan data is that you can genuinely see how it is. You don't have to interpret a crappy picture or something, right? You genuinely can see how it is. There is of course bias because scans can be crappy, but in general, scans are phenomenal as practice. You can even use the same scan over and over again. One way I like to think about sculpting is similar to, I've been using this metaphor before, but it's similar to, like, if you want to do like professional fighting, right? You need kind of two parts there. You need to just build up the strength, which is just your push-ups, right? Your pure strength training. If you have perfect technique but no strength, it doesn't matter. Or if you have perfect strength but no technique, also doesn't matter. So you need both. You need to practice. You need to do like real world sparring, practicing with real people, so you get that down, but also you just need to build the strength. And it's the same thing here. So if you want to practice strength, quote unquote strength, in CG sculpting, what you can do, you can sculpt the same scan over and over again. Like, that's kind of like push-ups, right? Like, it's just kind of boring, but it doesn't matter because you're just practicing. So by doing that, you can genuinely improve so much. You can of course have a few different scans, but this way you can just truly see what the real world is like, and every single time you're going to get better. And then you need to do personal projects as well. You need to just do projects, do different kind of characters, try to do something creative, figure things out, because that's also a massive part of it. Again, imagine if you have somebody who's only been practicing their little fighting moves or their the push-ups, and then they go to an actual fight without actually having practiced that before. You get your ass handed to you. So it's really important to do a good mix of these two. Because what a lot of people do, they either only practice or they only do personal projects. So if you only do personal projects, you're gonna get good familiarity with software. You're gonna get a good understanding of the overall workflow, but the fundamentals might be quite weak. So it's really important to do both. Or if you do the opposite, where you sculpt so much, you practice so much, then you're going to get a good understanding of the fundamental workflow, but it might be quite severely lacking in terms of workflow as well. Then you can kind of turn into a ZBrush cowboy. I know some people like to keep their topology clean from the beginning. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah, I mean, what I often do is I do a zero meshing pass, because it's really nice to have zero meshing topology to work from. But the problem with that is that if you want to do any changes, like what I've done several changes already, right? Like added these kind of spikes to it, then these kind of wooden branches. If you want to do that, well, you have to kind of redo it, right? Over and over again. So I find it to be really beneficial to do nice Dynamesh Sculptbrus Pro topology, and until it's at a level where I can do a pass of either zero meshing as a first pass, just to once the design is somehow sorted, and then I do a final retouple pass afterwards. Did you hear what happened with Adobe? I did not. Well, so many things are happening with Adobe. Which one? There's so many things happening with them at the moment. I was using Photoshop earlier today, and suddenly it felt unusable because they had pre-selection enabled for layers. So when you hovered over a layer, it would pre-select the layer. That absolutely pissed me off. So I had to find a way to disable that. So simply they were kind of making their software worse as well. It was also like if you hovered over a layer in the kind of the viewport, not like in layer stack, it would also like pre-select that one as well. That was completely unusable. So looks like those guys are kind of throwing a lot of stuff at Photoshop and seeing what sticks at the moment. Here's a good question. When making a character creature, should we actually start by making its skeleton first, then add all the individual muscles to make sure it's anatomically correct? Honestly, this depends on kind of your skill level. So what I often do is that I've obviously been doing this for some time, right? But what I personally do is that I find anatomical reference for the kind of character I'm doing. If it's a lion or something, or if it were to be a dog, which I'm obviously less familiar with animal anatomy, then I will try to actually put in a skeleton of that. But if it's for a human, I kind of have a decent idea what's going on there. I don't really use that kind of reference. I don't really use a pure anatomical ref, because all people are fundamentally the same. I use more like a ref of them, like almost like costume design ref, or like their personality ref. So yeah, it really just depends on what you want to do. You don't like, also depends on what the aim is. I always separate out sculpting into basically two kinds of sculpts. Essentially, you're doing the pure practice, which is at the end of the sculpt, you kind of just throw it away. Like, it doesn't really matter. You can keep it right as a memorabilia, but you don't really care about the sculpt. It's never going to be seen by anyone. You're just here to make sure that you're learning as much as you can. And then the second one is the opposite of that. That is when it's meant to be shown. This can be a commission, or it's professional work, or it's a portfolio piece or something like that. For that, you have to be real sure that it looks good. So it really just depends on what you're doing. So if I find that if I were to build each muscle from scratch, it often ends up looking worse, paradoxically, because it ends up being so technical and rigid. So, but you learn a lot from it. So don't think I would do that if this was if I was working for a commercial job. Also, man, it just takes too long. So you can import a skeleton reference and then sculpt muscles on top of that. Yep, putting in a skeleton is a great idea. Like, it's really good idea to put in a skeleton into your mesh. I actually have that right here. So I have a lot of my anatomical ref here, so we can just like throw in head planes from starting point. You can throw in a skull here. So tons of useful stuff here already. So yeah, I really like using that. Here I'm just trying to make, there isn't really any definition here when it comes to the lats. So I'm just gonna kind of try to sneak in some lats into this character, because here it's basically all like, it's an exoskeleton almost, which is cool, but I want to just make this a little bit more anatomical. So I'm just gonna sneak in a little bit of cheeky latissimus dorsi in here. Oh yeah, so about Adobe thing, that the US government is suing them. I'm fully expecting Adobe to have to pay a massive settlement suit or as a fine, either to the US government or to the EU, because my god, their their practices for unsubscribing is insane. Like you subscribe to one of their products, you want to pay for it for a little bit, then you were like, all right, cool, I don't need it anymore, and then you realize, that's going to be $200 as a fine, and because you can basically never unsubscribe. Though there is a little bit of a workaround for that. The workaround is that you switch to another product. You don't unsubscribe. You don't cancel your plan. You switch to another product and then you cancel that plan. That works. But yeah, it's a real pain in the ass. I hope they, like, I've seen in the EU, right? Like you have like Alphabet and Meta and such, they get hammered all the time with giant fines. And a lot of that is like you're kind of looking at what they're fined for, and you're like, I guess, kinda, yeah, I suppose. But what Adobe is doing here is like straight up unethical. Like it's not even like a slight privacy issue or something. It's straight up they're knowingly trapping people into their subscription plans. Like there is no way that's an accident. Oh wow, we just happen to build a subscription model with a highly specific opt-out plan that just happens to benefit us. There's no way in hell that's a coincidence. Like this is done with, it's not even with malice, it's just done with pure profit in mind. So I highly expect those guys to have to spend a lot of money on that. And hopefully the damages are going to be punitive as well, not just like, oh, you made, like, not just a cost of business thing for them, right? Because that's often what happens. Like a bank, they get a fine for $2 million and they made $500 million, right? Like on the thing they were doing. Like it needs to be punitive. It needs to be sure that they don't do that stuff again, because they are. So let's see what happens with Adobe. I'm going to try to make his arms a little bit thinner because he looks a little bit too beefy now. Not that he's crazy beefy, but I want him just to be thinner. It's been fairly decent progress on him today, actually, just during the stream. Yeah, the only Adobe software I use now is Photoshop and Substance Painter. We use at Flip Moments we've been doing, obviously we do a lot of video editing, right, because of YouTube, and we've been doing Premiere Pro for the longest time, but now it's all, let's see if I have it open here. No, I don't. I was using DaVinci Resolve. DaVinci Resolve is so much nicer. Perfectly free to use as well. So you can do a lot of things. For most people, I really think the free version of DaVinci Resolve is perfectly good enough as well. Like I strongly recommend the free version of it. We were on the free version until like a few months ago now, like I don't know, 2 months ago, and pretty much the only reason we upgraded was because the new version had a lot of really cool tools. Like it could auto transcribe the video, so you can do text-based editing, which is fantastic, and it can do auto subtitles as well. So our videos can now just have subtitles, because we never really did subtitles before, because it would either be too expensive or it would take too much time for us to do. But now we can make them real fast with DaVinci. So really cool stuff. But yeah, the free version is more than plenty for most people. And the paid version is like a few $100s, like $250 or $200 or something. It's a complete rounding error compared to what it could be. So it's not a subscription model. So it's very good. Also, like DaVinci has, like, it's just better than Premiere. It's not even for me, it's not even you know how a lot of people use Blender because it's free, but if it wasn't free, they wouldn't use it. Well, it's not like that for DaVinci. It's actually legitimately a really good software. Are you watching or playing anything cool at the moment? I just been playing the Elden Ring DLC. Guess I was a little disappointed because it was a bit shorter than I thought. It took like, I'm at the final boss now, and it took like 10 hours or something, just a bit more than that. And I feel I've explored a lot, so kind of done with that now, I guess. Before that I played Returnal, which I absolutely loved. Completely insane game. So I finished Returnal like some weeks ago. Absolutely loved that. I also got a new GPU the other day, so I might look into some games on my PC, because I actually have a computer that can play pretty beefy games now. Yeah, the only boss that gave me trouble for the DLC was Mesmer. The Mesmer the Impaler, I think it was. The other ones were quite straightforward, but he took a bit of practice. But my build was also big bonk. Like it was a strength build. So then I switched back to my good old bleed build, and that helped a lot. I think it might have been maybe like 15 hours or something, but really not a lot more than that. I don't think it was even 15 hours. But I really like these games. Over the last few years, I've really got into the Souls one. My favorite one by far is Sekiro. Like really enjoy that. But also strangely enjoyed, I really enjoyed Lies of P as well. I think Lies of P was a brilliant game. It came out and I beat it like 4 times within like 3 weeks. Just really enjoyed Lies of P. It was a really fresh take on it. That if people don't know about Lies of P, you play as Pinocchio during a puppet invasion. It's really cool in some kind of steampunk world, but it feels very much like a Souls game as well. Let me tell you folks, sculpting and talking, that was a skill that took a long time to develop. Pretty much the only reason I can do that is because I've been practicing so much for flip normals, because we kind of had to. The earlier tutorials we did for both for YouTube and like paid courses, they were all recorded separately. So we sculpted first and then we talked over second afterwards, because it was so difficult to do that at the same time. Like legit just took a lot of practice to do that, and it's still not as good as if I'm just sitting and concentrating, but you know, it is what it is. I can still do it to a fairly decent level now, which is really helpful, because when I do my mentorship, I can sculpt and talk at the same time. Just like sculpt and draw over things and just like be like explaining things and such, so that's quite handy. I also have a stream deck as well now, which is really handy. I've had it for a few years now. Just really handy for like pausing the recording and adding, like using this tool here is called Epic Pen. So really useful. Epic Pen, super nice for doing this, for just drawing on top of the screen. So it means that I don't really have to edit a whole lot. Don't have to like pause the recording and then like or like edit stuff in and afterwards and such. You can just draw on top. Makes it so much easier. How would you incorporate a 2D illustrative skill set into your 3D workflow? Honestly, that depends entirely on what you want to do. There are so many ways, right? Like it can be that your sculpting, your drawing skills are going into like how you're sculpting. It can be that it's how you texture. It can be that you do everything in 3D, then you paint on top of it afterwards with illustration skills. Like it's a really broad question, so I can't really give you a really straightforward answer for that. Yeah, the site is down at the moment. We get that when once in a while when there's a lot of traffic on it, like during the sales, then it sometimes goes down. Yeah, the here's a question like I would just want to, or a comment, I just want to avoid Adobe altogether. Yeah, I get it. Painter is good. Painter is legit a good software that they're building. Photoshop, I wouldn't say it's good or bad. It just kind of is. It's almost like it's just one of those like Swiss Army knives I use all the time. I have DaVinci, or not even DaVinci, Affinity Resolve, and it's decent. It's very cheap, of course, but it's missing a lot of features that I use. I use a lot of like the content aware fill tools. They're so handy when you need to like remove something, particularly if you need to like remove gradients or something from photos. It's very useful. We use it a lot for social media for flip normals. So if you have an image with text on top or something, we can very easily just remove that text, just because we can't have text on the posts we put out on social media, because the platforms really don't like it. They really recommend that you don't use text on anything there. So yeah, so very, very beneficial to use those tools. But yeah, I mean, if there was something that could replace Photoshop, I would use it. I have no love for Photoshop. So in the last few years, I've replaced Audition, which is their audio tool. I used to use Audition for everything. Now we use Fairlight within DaVinci Resolve, and obviously DaVinci Resolve is has replaced Premiere for us. So nice to replace Premiere. Was my god, I just didn't enjoy Premiere. The reason wasn't even like, oh, screw Adobe thing. It was just the fact that it was so slow, like to the point I couldn't see my videos in real time, and I had a beefy computer. Like I'm usually editing on my MacBook. You know, that was the most spec'd out MacBook on the market like some years ago, and that should be able to play anything real time. That's a beefy computer, and it couldn't even play unedited files, like just MP4 files. So we definitely had to change that up, and that's where we looked into that. I even looked into like Final Cut as well, which was quite nice, but it wasn't on PC, and it's quite nice to be able to go back and forth between PC and Mac. I wouldn't like to like platform lock myself into a software like that. No ZBrush on Linux. No ZBrush on Linux. That is really annoying because this is something we had in everyone who's in VFX has this issue, because VFX is all Linux based. Like there's basically like all pipelines are going to be based on Linux for whatever reason that is. Really good reasons that is, but you know that don't have to discuss that now. But yeah, then if you need to use ZBrush, you need to have a separate Windows box, which is very annoying. You need like a straight up different computer for ZBrush and for Photoshop as well, because there's also no Photoshop on Linux apart from like, I don't know, Photoshop CS2 or something, which is like I think legit 20 years old at this point. One thing that's kind of cool about sculpting like this is you really don't need anything fancy in terms of the sculpting process, right? You can just keep it really simple. So you don't need to know all of ZBrush in order to do this. You just need to have a decent understanding of how the whole thing works. Oh, and I think we might have crashed. Oh crap. I think I might be losing all my work now. Let's see what's happening. Oh no. Yeah, this smells like a crash. Yeah, I think I might be... Alright, let's... because I haven't saved. I'm just gonna save real quick. Yeah, last save was a few weeks ago. So... Alright, I was able to avoid the crash. So, no matter what happens now... Let's see. You can see up here, the whole thing kind of exploded. So... Let's see, I was trying to dynamesh after all. So if this happens, you might restart ZBrush, but there is also another thing. You can go to all the way here, and I think it's under, I think they might have moved it actually. It's called Fix Mesh. I think it might be under Geometry. I just have to see. Mesh Integrity, here we go, Fix Mesh. It's because sometimes some crazy stuff happens when you're dealing with Dynamesh, and it just goes a little crazy. But yeah, here we go. The whole thing just exploded now. When this happens as well, what I often do, I straight up export the mesh and I import it back in again. Oh, it might be because the it was hiding parts. Yeah, that was it. That of course shouldn't happen. That smells like a ZBrush bug. But yeah, if that happens, if you do have issues with that, just exporting as OBJ and importing as OBJ is usually going to help. Here I'm trying to think about the gesture, like how this kind of flows in here. So just trying to think about this. Yeah, so somebody here was asking about how do I get started in ZBrush. We have an introduction to ZBrush. So the site may or may not be down at the moment, again due to excess traffic. But this is a solid course. This is also made by myself as well. So we cover, like, it's a few years old now, but it doesn't matter because there really isn't a whole lot new in ZBrush. The interface is the same, so the main features are the same. There are some new ones that have been added, but honestly I'm using ZBrush 2022 still because there really isn't anything relevant for me in the most recent ones. Is it worth upgrading to the new version if I have ZBrush 2022? I mean, that's exactly where I am currently. I don't think so. The only reason is because you would have to like if you need to open files from somebody else. So because if I have 2024 and you have 2022, we can't exchange files. We would have to do OBJs, which is fine if you want to get this scope, but it's not fine if you have layers or it's in a pipeline or something. So eventually everyone is gonna have to upgrade, at least most people, but there are no new features worth getting, in my opinion. That's also what happens when a software gets really mature, is you reach a point where you keep adding new stuff to it, but what you have is kind of working, so there isn't really a reason to pay for it, because all versions of ZBrush used to be free until recently, and now it's not under Maxon, so now you have to be in a subscription. So it means that there is just, yeah, suddenly you actually have to justify it with your wallet if you want to upgrade or not. Yes, I've been going for almost 2 hours now, so I think 2 hours. Then, so I think I'm going to finish this off soonish, but I'll be doing a lot more streaming this Black Friday. Well, I keep saying Black Friday this summer, this summer sale. Seasons, man, seasons are confusing. I'll just continue for a bit longer because this is a lot of fun. It's really nice just kind of sculpting this because it's a little bit abstract, and yet it's not at the same time. Here's something that's kind of interesting about anatomy as well. This is something that's really easy to overlook. When it comes to like the biceps, it's really easy to make kind of like this parallel, like this. Terrible colors, I'll redraw this. Just to have like the arm and the bicep just goes parallel here. But really it goes a lot more like diagonal like this. So this is something I'm kind of trying to get into the sculpt as well. Just trying to make it a bit more rhythmical like this. This makes sense when we start to look at the anatomy model as well of this, where you have the biceps here, and it goes basically from like up here, right? So it does go quite parallel to this. This is something you can see in some people quite extremely, and some people can't see it at all. There's just a lot of variety between people as well. So how much is DaVinci? Free version is free, I suppose. So that's one we've been using for the longest time. Like honestly, if you want to just try DaVinci, it's perfectly free. So there isn't really like a catch or anything because it's made by Blackmagic and they make hardware. So I think DaVinci works really well with their Blackmagic hardware. So there isn't really any like, it's not like a gotcha or something. Aha, now you can only use it for like certain things. I don't think you can do 4K on it on the free version, but we don't do 4K anyway. Like the reason we don't do 4K for videos is because everything looks absolutely tiny then. Like the icons look really, really small, and also the resolution is like just a lot higher, so they take up more space. If you're working in high resolution without subdivisions and need to make big changes to the form, how would you go about that? Yeah, you just kind of do. Like there isn't really a simple, like a straightforward answer to that. If you have a really high poly mesh and you need to do big changes, you might just have to resculpt parts of it, to be honest. That's one of the reasons I do really like to use subdivisions. That's why once the sculpt is kind of working, then I'll turn this into like a sear mesh model with subdivision levels, just because it's just a lot easier to do exactly that. Yeah, so that's one of the main reasons I do really prefer to stick to subdivisions where I can. Sculptors Pro with the snake hook is so good. Just so you can just add these little shapes here, really, really, really handy. How long into your journey in the industry were at the point where you could make high quality industry standard models? I mean, I wouldn't get hired if I couldn't make high quality industry standard models, I would assume. So you always learn, right, when you're in the industry. But if you need to basically be at that level before you start. Sure, there are naming conventions and pipeline things you can't really know before because it's specific. But I mean, like, yeah, every person who is hired as a modeler is essentially going to be able to do that before they get hired, because nobody's gonna. This was different, like back in the days, right? Where, like, even before I got hired, where people would kind of take a chance on you because it was just a lot easier to get hired. But today you need to just be at a level where you're already good enough. Like, I don't think anyone today can just be like, yeah, I'll just kind of learn on the job. You need to already be at a level where they trust you. Basically, you need to be at the level where you hit the ground running. With the caveat that, of course, yes, pipeline is different, and you need to learn pipeline. Need to learn, like, you don't need to learn Linux before, right? That's the kind of stuff you can learn on the job. But it'd be like if you're a character artist and you expect to learn to sculpt on a job. And that's just not happening. You need to be at a level where you can kind of do that beforehand. You can always improve, but they're not going to train you for that stuff. Off-topic question, but is it possible to work only on animals and animal fur? Possible, really hard. If you wanna, there isn't really a position, like, now assuming it's VFX, right? But there isn't really a position where you do animals and animal fur, meaning that you do the modeling and then you do the grooming. There might be some for commercials and such, but it's a rare position to have. Usually fur is done by a groom department. So if you want to only do animal fur, just look into groom positions. That's where they have the unfortunate name of being called groomers or groom artists. So but that's what they're doing, right? So you can do that, but it's really hard to get into a position where you do animals and that full time. But yeah, as a groom artist, 100% doable. Particularly if you end up in a company like NPC, who's been, like, I guess they're working on Lion King 2 now as well. It's going to have absolute crap ton of animals. Wow, so you just groom all day? Yep, that's what they do. It's not just for animals, it's also for humans as well. Like, it's all kind of hairstyles and fur and even feathers as well, depending on the company and how it works. But yeah, is it better to specialize your skills, to be a jack of all trades in the industry? Man, that really depends. It depends on what industry it is as well, because you have, like, let's say you want to do your character, right, or something like this. Then in VFX, you need to specialize. But if you want to do commercials, you have to be more generalist. And if you want to do TV, is a bit of a mix. So it really just depends. It's more like, what do you prefer doing, and then kind of stick with that. But yeah, I mean, in nearly all VFX studios today, it's filled with specialists. It used to be a lot more generalist, but honestly, as tech got like more specialized, whereas the requirements for shots got a lot higher, you just need specialists to do things. It's very difficult to, for instance, be able to do grooming and texturing and rigging and animation today. Which before, if the requirement was a lot lower in terms of the skills, that was more doable. But the more high end it gets, the harder that stuff becomes. So that was what I was mentioning, right? Like you have the groom department that they do groom all day, peach fuzz, hairstyles, feathers, fur, all that kind of stuff. Just because it's so specialized today. But I'm not sure about games for that. But it seems like games is fairly specialized today as well, to be fair. So the general thing is, the bigger the company, the more specialized people are going to be. But if you have a tiny company of like 10 people, there probably isn't room for being a specialist as well. At the first studio I worked on in Norway, there was like 1 or 2 guys who were specialists at animation. Apart from that, most people, and even they, I think, were doing some rigging as well. And most people were doing a lot of different things. So it depends a lot as well, because in the UK, for instance, where I'm currently at, or in Canada, US, you have a lot of different industries within entertainment, but a lot of countries just don't really have that. So if you're in Greece, for instance, or in Turkey, right, there might not be a lot of specialists positioned for just that, because there just isn't industrial VFX to this degree. You might have some, but it's just not to the same degree as like the big VFX houses in London specifically, or Canada, Montreal, that you have there. Do you have any tips for portfolios that you wish you knew when you first started the industry? Honestly, keep it simple. If I was building a portfolio today, I would have a few very high quality pieces that I would spend a lot of time on. Present them really well, but don't do any kind of flashy editing. You don't have to edit to music or anything. Like, don't do anything silly like that. Just keep them simple. Keep your pieces nice, and get feedback by professionals if at all possible. Like, I think that's really, really, really important to do. Get feedback by people who know what they're talking about. And unfortunately, your professors or your teachers are probably not going to be those people in nearly all cases. There are, of course, exceptions, but realistically, most feedback I've seen from teachers is just not good enough. It needs to be somebody who's doing this for a living. How do you, like, in order to do character feedback to a high level, which is what you need when you're doing a portfolio, you need to be a specialist at it. And unfortunately, most teachers are not going to be specialists at that, or specialists at anything, because they have so many things to teach. It's not even the fault of the teacher necessarily. It's just, man, you just need to cover a lot of ground if you're teaching things. So from professionals, very important. And your mom does not count, right? Like, just get it. Find some people on LinkedIn. Hell, even offer to pay them if you feel like it, right? If you don't get any responses. And keep your message short and to the point. Don't waste anyone's time. Assuming these people are extremely busy people. It's not even like putting professionals on a pedestal. There's people, right? It's more just like from a purely practical point of view. If you get a message and it's a very long message, most likely you're not going to reply to that. But if you get a message which is basically like a yes, you can answer yes or no, just chances are just much higher that you're going to get an actual reply from that. I think it's so important to get feedback from people like that. And when you do, say thank you. This happens to every single person who's ever given feedback. You give some really detailed, give a real detailed review of something, and they might just reply, "Thanks," in all lowercase. And that's it. And you're like, ah, cheers. So yeah, write them. Just be polite and be nice to them, because these are just people as well. And for the love of God, if you're in school and you get an assignment which is like contact professionals and ask them their opinion for a paper, I just don't do that. People get that all the time. Like there's so many students who contact people and they're just like, I need this for my paper. Okay, cool. Nobody cares about your school papers. Your grade truly does not matter. Focus on building a cool portfolio. I'm happy to help students, but I'm not happy to help students get a good grade. I truly do not care, because nobody cares about that stuff. Like if you were to make a paper about how topology is changing in the industry, or how professionals are using different tools to achieve different jobs, it truly does not matter in the slightest. Just focus on, like, it would be the thing we talked about before, if somebody's still from that early era of the stream, where if you're a carpenter and if you get an essay, the assignment in school, talk to carpenters about how they're using their tools and write an essay about that. It doesn't matter. What matters is, can you build things as a carpenter? Do you have the skills to build things as a carpenter? That is really the only thing that matters. Everything else is just noise. Focus on that. Yeah, if there are any questions I missed, just shoot them, because I'm not scrolling because it's on my second monitor. So just ask the question again. Like, I'm not ignoring any questions here. I just it's just a lot. How do you handle feedback from individuals who are not specialists or have any experience in your craft but feel entitled to give you feedback on your work? You say thank you and you move on. Like, if it's not useful feedback, just don't argue with them. Just go, yeah, thanks, and then thank you for your feedback. You don't have to be turned into something that's not. You don't have to turn it into something like, you're not qualified to give me feedback, or be sarcastic. Just thank you, move on. That's it. Like this, an example of this would be like family members who legit would have no experience in anything here, but they would still feel entitled to give their opinion about your topology, right, or your models or anything like that. Like they might have good intentions behind it, they might not. They might be a power thing as well, but it doesn't matter. Just thanks. That's it. It would be like if I were to give animation feedback to somebody, right? It would be like, I'm not qualified to give animation feedback to somebody, right? So I just wouldn't really do that. But if I'd given that, it would just be kind of worthless. Like if somebody forced me to give anime feedback, it would just not be very good, because you have to be a specialist. Because particularly at this kind of stuff, but it genuinely just isn't. Like it's a specialist thing. It's like you're a traditional sculptor. You need specialist feedback on it. I admire your sage wisdom and your sculpting precision. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, like I said before, sculpting precision and talking at the same time, man, that's a skill that takes time to develop. Over the years, have you seen Blender used more for films than before, or is the VFX 2 interconnected at this point with Maya for Blender to get traction? Yeah, this is something we talked about in some of the videos before. Fundamentally, Blender doesn't really solve a problem for VFX. Everything is like before. Everything used to be more like running on a Maya pipeline. You know, like the rigging was done in Maya, then lighting and rendering was done in Maya directly from there. But today, all that is done basically through like separate software. It might be in Houdini, so you might publish your model from Maya and you might just export that and render it in Houdini, or it might be in Katana or something like that. But it's still like the main hub, so everything still needs to go through Maya unless you're at ILM where they use their own specialized thing for publishing things. But for me, Blender doesn't really solve anything, because for modeling, like, it's fine, but this is an issue I had with the Modo, actually, to talk about that. I was using Modo when I started my career because Modo was awesome back then. Still is, it's just, it hasn't changed since then. And I was trying to use Modo for some of the projects, and licensing was fine, because I was able to get a license for that through work. But the moment I had to like deal with the pipeline, it was just kind of a pain in the ass, to be honest, because when you're in a pipeline, you have a model and it needs to be in a specific, it needs to be set up in a specific manner. It might need to have it definitely has to be grouped in a way. It needs to have been named in a certain way. It needs to have a specific UV setup with specific UV maps and all that, right? You need to have like multiple UV maps, maybe a rig set and all that kind of stuff. And it might be like tags for it, like basically like prim bars attached to the model as well. So you can say that this model here has some metadata, and that means it's going to be subdivided at render time, and this does not. The moment you start to exit the pipeline, which means that you're now exporting, in this case, to Modo, or it can be to Blender, man, you just have to set up a lot of that kind of stuff again, and then you start to screw these kind of things up because you forgot to add the tag back on it, or you had to ungroup it or group it again, because Blender doesn't really have groups, right? So it has collections. It's not the same thing at all. So it just becomes a real issue, but also because Maya is fine. Like, it genuinely just is fine at what it's doing, and you wouldn't use, like, particularly for things like animation and rigging. Like, Maya is not just fine. Maya is the standard for that. Blender is nowhere near ready for that. So it doesn't really solve anything. So essentially, like, I haven't really, like, I'm not in VFX now, but I talk to a lot of people who are, I meet with people regularly, and there are some people who insist on using Blender, but really it's not really a relevant tool for VFX. I mean, even you even have issues organizing your scenes in Blender, right? You can't even set an arbitrary order for things in Blender if you want to do that in the outliner. So it's just missing so many things. It's also just the fact that it's untested, right? So yeah, it doesn't really solve anything, and for me, there's no reason to use that. Yes, it's free, but free doesn't mean it's free. It means that there's no cost associated with to get a version for it. But in order to have a production, there are so many more variables associated with cost than just the pure license fee. The license fee is not nothing for Maya, for the other software, but you have to retrain your whole crew to use it, which just means lost productivity. You have to rebuild a lot of scripts, like a lot of pipeline stuff, which has been built over like maybe 20 years, right? Just that is going to take ages, and then something is going to go wrong, and you might lose a week or work here. You might lose a deadline. Like, it's just not worth fiddling with that. Like, if it's a well-oiled machine, then don't fiddle with those stuff. And VFX is pretty well oiled, and it's also like cutting edge in many ways as well. Sure, there might be a few versions behind on Maya and all that, but in terms of like pipeline, they're generally trying to innovate here. So there is a reason they're all in Katana or Houdini at the moment, right? Because it's generally the most cutting edge things in terms of that. They're all using like custom render engines or RenderMan or Arnold and such, because it's good stuff. So yeah, it doesn't really solve an issue. It's a great software for what it is, but yeah, in the same way you wouldn't use ZBrush as a pipeline tool, right? You wouldn't use Blender as a texturing tool. Use whatever tool gets the job done. Also, on VFX, so many people there don't really care about the software. They just want to do their job. For a lot of people there, it's just about a job. It's just a job like anything else, where they're not really that connected to the software world or community side of it. So it's really easy to assume that the online world is reflective of the offline world. And it kind of is to some degree, but also there's definitely a barrier there. You're like, if you assume that everyone's on YouTube and Twitter, like it's just not the case. So if you've been using Maya for 20 years, you know everything about it, and you're just not going to bother learning a new software. It's just annoying learning new software, particularly if it the end of it, you can just kind of do exactly what you're still doing. Here's that one. Can you tell me the correct way to use Decimation Master and ZBrush to get the best details? There isn't really any settings for it. You just kind of set it to number. The higher the number, the higher the poly count, but also which would also preserves better details. So it's really just about finding that number, finding what works for your project at this point in time. Like this wouldn't be very heavy to render at all because this is just a mill, like just 1 million here. Should also save. So this is just a million. So this is like nice and easy. So this here could probably go down to 150,000 like easily without any issue. What's one thing that you love talking about that gets you excited? Honestly, education inside of CG. I mean, that's one of the reasons we have flip normals, right? Like, it's really genuinely really cool that we get to, you know, do streams like this and talk to people, like visiting schools. I really like visiting schools. It's really fun to do that, and just like learning more about CG. Like I have a mentorship as well, which I really enjoy doing. So I get to like really stay on top of my sculpting game because of that. Just sending out a shameless plug for my mentorship there as well, if somebody's interested in that. But yeah, that's I really enjoy doing that. It's really fun to teach this kind of stuff. It's very challenging to teach sculpting as well because it's hard. It's just a hard thing to learn. It's a hard thing to teach. So yeah, it's good fun. I just think 3D is neat. I just think 3D is really cool. It's one of the things I always just enjoyed doing. It's one of those things, why do you still do 3D? Well, I just like, kind of like it. It's just really fun. Particularly sculpting is such a deep fundamental thing where it just is down to, a lot of it is down to like almost philosophy. Like how do you think about the world? Because it becomes a much bigger thing than just pure anatomy. Just trying to get some nice little spirals in here, trying to make the art direction feel a bit more art direction-y. It's a hard character to sculpt. It's one of those hobbies wanted to sculpt this for a very long time. It's one of my absolute favorite movies. Completely wild movie. If you guys haven't seen Pan's Labyrinth, you're really missing out. Spanish movie by Guillermo del Toro. Crazy, crazy, crazy film. It's not a fun movie. It's not a fun movie at all. It's a very, 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 very dark movie. But it's really nice. Looks gorgeous. Nice artwork, brother. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, this started out a bit rougher today. Let's actually load in what that looked like. That was, yeah, 2 weeks ago. Today was the last save. So this is the progress. This is the progress today. This one. So pretty happy with this today. So what I've been doing today is essentially just looking at the model and just trying to sculpt what I'm seeing. Like, no, there was nothing fancy about it. It just takes time. Just put in what you're seeing into the sculpt and just go with that. It's really tricky to do that, but because observation is one of those skills that nobody really teaches you. So just really focusing on that, just looking at the ref, forcing in what you're seeing is one of the best pieces of advice I have to people who want to improve their sculpting. So underrated as a skill. It's so easy to focus so much on the technicals, like purely on like anatomy or subdivisions or, you know, all that kind of good stuff. But it's really important to keep your eye on things like observation. But all right, with that, I am going to start to shut this down. So I'm going to take a few more questions for Sculpted Realms. I answered your decimation question a few minutes ago, so you can just go back in the chat or in the stream. You should be able to do that. And how to use noise plugin with layers. I don't really use that, so I wouldn't really know. But yeah, I'll do maybe like one more question and then we'll see. I'll just save this thing here. Save this as a new version. Yes, I'm pretty happy with the progress. It's I've spent most of the time today just on the body, though some on the head as well, just making sure that the hair was looking a bit better, or the area around the hair. So let's have a quick look about this. This is before. And then this is after. So yeah, definitely improvement here. Okay, here's one. What was your journey like landing your first job as a VFX or character artist? Yeah, so I started the first job I actually had was back in Norway in 2009. So I was 17 years old then. And that was at a local studio, so I was doing that basically like a few days a week. And I learned so much from that. But I wanted to learn a lot more about the fundamentals, so I went to school in Denmark called the Animation Workshop. This is where I met Morten as well. So went there for 3 years. 10 years ago, almost to the day, I moved to London, started at the internship at Framestore, the summer internship there. That was really fun. And then they weren't hiring at the time, so I didn't get a job there. And then I started at NPC like 2-3 months after that in September 2014. Started pretty much bang on us on characters, so that was really fun. Just worked, they hired so many people because they hired for Jungle Book at the time. So I was hired, I didn't do any Jungle Book, but worked on a lot of interesting stuff there. And then went to DNEG a few years later, and yeah, just had a good time there. Worked on a lot of really cool characters, and yeah, now doing flip normals. So that's kind of it. I just sculpted a lot, like throughout all my spare time. So I just sculpted like crazy just to get to a level where I could do that, get to a level where I was able to sculpt. But yeah, just sculpted like mad. Did tons of personal projects. So yeah, that was like a short version of my journey. And yeah, now like, you know, you're taking my mentorship, then I'm doing the mentorship now for the last few years. Really enjoying that. Really allows me to connect with people, really help people. So yeah, that was good fun. What is it like moving to other countries or different countries? Moving to different countries kind of sucks because you're kind of starting over again. You have to figure out, you know, socially you're getting a whole new group of people around you, different language. Of course, I was still fluent in English when I moved there, but still different language, right? And you have to figure out all things like banks and everything, but it's also really good fun because it's a different culture. And like I almost like consider London to be a different country than the rest of England or the UK because it's just so different. It's almost like Singapore compared to like Malaysia. It's just a very different place. So it's good fun. It's really good fun. Yeah, tons of opportunities, particularly living where I'm living now. Like in London, there's so many jobs available. Well, not right now, but there used to be. So yeah, moving country is awesome. I do recommend it, but it also kind of sucks because it's a big life change. But I recommend everyone to move country, or at least move away from your hometown at least once. You just learn tons of it that way. But cool, that's it for today. Thanks to everyone who joined. We're now at almost 2.5 hours, so we'll do more of this later this week. I'm going to maybe tomorrow, and I'm probably going to continue on this character, just continue to refine him. And yeah, thanks to everyone who stopped by. This has been a real pleasure.